So I guess the most noticeable thing straight off the bat is the joystick, which is used to control the vector synthesis engine, which is what makes this synth kind of a bit different to other ones, I guess. The rest of the controls, like the envelopes and the filter and all that sort of stuff, that's, you know, fairly standard to most subtractive synths, like analog synths and that sort of thing. Essentially how this works is this synth has up to 4 oscillators in play at any one time. Each of those oscillators can be set to a different waveform from a bank of about 100 waveforms, and then you use this stick to blend between them. Generally speaking, or, you know, in the simplest terms, how it works is that if you move laterally from left to right, then that controls the blend or the kind of crossfade between the A and the C waveform. So that's, you know, kind of all A, and then C would be negligible, I guess. And then over here is vice versa, so that's all C, and then obviously considerably less A. And then vertically the same, if you go up to B, then that's all B. And then down here is all D. Obviously where it gets a bit more complicated or interesting sonically, I suppose, is when you're in the positions in between all these 4, which is where it kind of works out a blend between the 4 waveforms. The manual explains it a bit more in depth than that, but that's essentially how it works. So I've got a sound loaded up here which has got 4 different waveforms on, 1 on each of the oscillators, so that they're all different, so we should be able to hear the difference. So that's, I guess, the A waveform, the C waveform predominantly, the B waveform, the D waveform. So when you're playing it, you can modulate between them in all manner of ways to create a kind of nice evolving sound. There is also envelopes built in to control this. So if you hold function and then select the mix envelope down here, there's various parameters we can step through. The one of most interest, I suppose, is the mix points. So you can use this to set where the starting balance of the waveforms are. So if we set mix point 0 to this, for example, and then go to mix point 1, then we can do that, and then mix point 2, and then mix point 3, and then mix point 4. So it's got 5 mix points, and then you can use, you know, various standard kind of enveloping controls to control them. You can also loop the envelope, make it repeat a certain number of times, or have it continuously changing. So the mix control is the arpeggiated sustain release for the envelope for the mix. So in that previous section we looked at how you set the mix points using the function and then the mix envelope, and then we can use this to set the mix points. This part of it is how essentially those mix points, you know, evolve over time using the ADSR kind of envelope. So, you know, that should give us essentially a way to control how the mix points that we set are spaced out over time, and thus how the sound evolves. And so you can kind of develop this these kind of evolving textures in 2 ways. One is via obviously the joystick, and then the other is via the envelope. So as you can kind of hear, the sound now has this kind of evolving nature. It changes over time because I've messed with the envelope for the mix of the 4 waveforms. Which, you know, gives rise to some very interesting potentials for kind of evolving, I guess, pad sounds, background sounds, stuff like that for me anyway. I'd first kind of come across vector synthesis like properly, and, you know, had to go with it myself when I found a SY22 in a cupboard at a place where I used to work, like kind of in storage. And I got it out and thought I had a little play with it. I thought, you know, it kind of looks like a gimmick with a joystick and all that sort of stuff. You know, is it going to be something of interest to me? But what I was blown away with was the sheer potential to create these really subtly evolving textures. That had a similar system where you could set envelopes to control the mix of the different waveforms or parts, but also had the joystick as well. And you could use this to really make sounds that kind of were kind of consistently around one sort of sonic palette, but could be developed over the course of a track. So for example, if you had a pad on a 4-minute piece of music, you might just have one synth sound just in the background, kind of background layer. But what this let you do is have that one sound in the background occupying that space, but then also, you know, as you went along, adding subtle variations which really bring a lot of life to a piece of music, I think. And that's, like I say, is what really drew me to vector synthesis to begin with. And then a couple of years later, this thing got released, I guess, and then I only recently got one, maybe last year. But I'm a big fan of it. So I guess now we've got the basic idea of vector synthesis out of the way, and we've got a better understanding of how the oscillators work. I'll just quickly run through the other features on this thing. So all this stuff's fairly straightforward. This button steps through different envelopes, I should say. There's a filter envelope with the usual attack, decay, sustain, release, which is controlled by these controllers here. There's an amp one, again, for volume rather than the filter, but obviously similar sort of thing. So the mix control is the attack, decay, sustain, release for the envelope for the mix. So that stuff's fairly straightforward. The LFO again is pretty straightforward. There's a depth control and a rate control for both of them. There's also more LFO functions down here, so you can set the shape, all that sort of stuff. You can, and that's basically it for that. So that's the LFO, very standard stuff. The analog filter, again, very standard. We've got a cutoff, we've got a resonance. We can control them with an envelope via this filter envelope section, or we can just do the classic turning of knobs thing. It's not the most exciting of filters. It's perfectly serviceable. That's one of the things I found was a bit weaker on this piece of kit, was the filter wasn't my favorite thing ever. That being said, it's more about, for me anyway, the vector synthesis angle with the envelopes for the mix and stuff than that. Moving on from there as well, this is the oscillator control. So you can step through the oscillators A to D down here. You can use this control to change the waveform. There are about 100, I believe, 99. Let's see. Oh, more than I thought there was. Apparently over 100. The manual has a big list of what they are, as well as like little sort of waveform plots, so you get an idea of how they sound, which is quite useful. There is also the wave frequency control, which is used to control either the coarse tuning of an oscillator or the fine tuning or the detune, so you can do sort of fat detune sounds. It took me a minute to figure this out, but essentially how it works is if you hold the function key and select the oscillator button down here, you can choose between either coarse or fine, and then when you go off this, then the freq control either does the left value, which I believe is the coarse tuning or the coarse pitch, and then if you hold function and you want to change the fine tuning, go back to there, set it to fine, go off that again, and then you'll notice it controls the right hand number, which is the fine tuning. That took me a minute to figure out. That was kind of a bit of a head scratcher for a second there. Other than that, fairly straightforward. The trick is obviously to hold the function key, and then you can use this to select whatever you want from down here. And some functions are up here, but then have extra functions down here as indicated along here. There's also a bunch of stuff to do with the sequencer, the arpeggio, tempo and sync and all that sort of stuff. In the system settings, we have various things to do with the global settings. We've got stuff to do with art mode, sequencer. We can switch between art mode and sequencer mode. If we step through it, there's also stuff to do with the engines used for the oscillators, which is kind of interesting. I've only spotted this recently, but essentially there's 3 different engines. I'm not sure if they all use the same waveforms. I would imagine they probably do, but just sound kind of different because they're modeled differently. So that might be something to fun with. So that might be something to have fun with. I believe it was on Modern Bright when I first got this, so we'll leave it on that. Sync settings, obviously fairly straightforward. We've got our internal sync, our MIDI, our USB, and then trigger, so we can use it with an analog sync signal in here, which is pretty straightforward. That's to do with the sequencer divisions, so we can change it to different things. A swing setting, yeah, so, and then the ARP type is this one here, so we've got various different ARP types. The only thing that I did find a bit annoying is that I guess you can't access the keyboard when you're using those, additional options. I guess if you've got an external MIDI keyboard, I suspect it'll still, or external MIDI source, I suspect it'll still let you send signal into it and hear the changes. I'll test that in a bit. That, I guess, is a bit of an annoyance. All that is fairly straightforward. I will say I've mostly figured this out without looking at the manual. I had to look for the frequency thing because that threw us a bit, and it took me a couple of minutes to figure out that if on the function modes, a lot of these have, well, not all of them, but a lot of them have, additional options you can cycle through by doing that. Yeah, but that's it in terms of kind of basic functionality, I think. What I'll do now is I'll move on to some demos. I've actually had this a little while, so I've actually used it on a track, and I've posted, I think, 1 or 2 videos. Well, no, I posted 1 video before where I kind of demoed it on a track, but I also used it in a recent live set as well, so we'll look at that as well. So now I've had a look at the kind of main features, the basic operation, and how this thing sounds. I guess now it's time for the kind of review portion of this. So what did I think of this thing? To be honest, the headline here is that for $89, I think the RRP is, and in the UK I paid about £70 for this. For that sort of money, honestly, this is amazing. I'm not sure you could do a lot better in terms of kind of bang for your buck, just because, you know, this thing's got an ARP, it's polyphonic. It's got 128 waveforms, so there's and 4 oscillators. There's a ton of possibilities there. The general build quality is pretty solid, pretty substantial. I really like the top mounted connections. I think that's really useful for gear of this size and stuff. It's kind of intended to be used on a tabletop or, like, you know, in a case or something like that in a live situation. Obviously the Vector Synth joystick is a ton of fun, and I've kind of explained earlier on in the video why I like that as a synthesis kind of model or interface. This synth obviously does have some drawbacks or some limitations, and this I think has to be expected given the price point. The things that I was less fond of, I guess, are, I thought the ARP was quite limited. I think there's possibly ways that they could have added more functionality to that without having to add a ton of complexity to things. Again, I'd rather have it than not, though. But the thing I didn't like at all about the ARP was the fact that, as far as I can work out, that if you hit play on your master clock, anything's synced up to it, it'll always play the ARP, which is fine for sequencer, but for the ARP, I don't know about that. I'm not sure if that's entirely the best way, especially for the way I make music. Again, I could have missed something in settings, so if I have, let me know. In terms of the rest of the synth, I've kind of went in the oscillator quite in depth, and I'm a big fan of all that, but the things that I thought were less good, I guess, were the filter. I don't find that particularly the most exciting filter in the world. It's kind of okay, does the job. I did find the envelopes kind of a little bit odd, to be honest. It feels, especially with the filter envelope, that like the release, it's basically like when it's low, it's nothing, and then you get about this far around, and it's kind of too long already. But then if you have it sort of too short, then it sounds like it sounds very choppy, and then the amp's kind of the same. You kind of have to have a bit of release to smooth things out, but then there's quite a fine balancing point between having a little bit of release to smooth things out and it just being really washy. The attack, kind of quite sharp. Like when you have on sounds, I've noticed when you have the attack down at 0, it's quite choppy sounding, which obviously you think that is kind of what you want from that kind of, really short attack, but it just kind of sounds a bit, I don't know, a bit crude, I guess. That's probably what I'm trying to say around here, say with this, is the envelopes just feel a bit crude. Again, for the cost of this thing, I think that's kind of reasonable, and they're not by any means bad, really, really bad. You've got a 4-stage envelope, which lots of synthesizers might not have. I've got things like the Wall-Off Rocket, which only has like a 2-stage envelope, 3-stage, but it's like switches. It's not even, you can't control every stage of it. So, without wishing to be unfairly punitive on this thing, for me, like I said, the drawbacks or the things I thought were a bit limiting was the envelopes were a bit crude, the filter was a bit bland, a bit basic, that thing with the ARP always starting when you hit play on your master clock, I also found that a bit annoying. It's nice to have the keyboard. I don't like these kind of membrane keyboard things. I don't think they're a ton of fun really, but it's good to have it. It obviously opens up a lot of extra options and stuff. I did check whether or not you could use the function menu options while you're sending signal in via MIDI, and you can. So whilst you can't play the keyboard when you're going through the menus, you can still have MIDI coming into it. So that's good. It's good they've kind of considered that. They also seem to be releasing firmware updates to this thing. I haven't really checked what version this is on, and if I can update it, but my understanding is you can update firmwares and they've added like gradually more functionality across the firmware, which is nice to see. So that's something I'm going to explore off camera, is whether or not there's maybe new firmware for this. The manual, that's the other thing that's just reminding me of the other thing that I found not as great on the synth, I guess, or thought could be improved maybe, was the manual. It does list all of the buttons and all the knobs and stuff, and describes them, but it describes them in ways that are so brief that you still have to do a whole lot of kind of figuring out yourself exactly how to use that. Like the stuff that's not in there, basically they'll kind of mention what a function is, but they'll not say like how to change it sometimes and stuff like that. I noticed in terms of what it sounds good on, I think primarily it works quite nicely for leads, and it works quite nicely for pad sounds. I really struggle to get any bass sounds that I massively liked out of it. In that first demo thing I showed you with the arpeggio, that was about the best I could do at doing a kind of sort of throbbing 80s kind of bass sound. The filter's just kind of not really up for it, and the envelope's kind of too weird, too crude to get that sort of stuff going on. Also, I just don't think it sounds that great with basses in general, just because of the waveform set, stuff like that. But like I say, for pads, it's great because of the evolving mix envelope and this thing, which is kind of what I showed you on one of the demos I put up there. Also, the chorus is really good for that sort of thing as well. And then it all seems to work quite well in leads, which was the other thing that I kind of showed you. So yeah, like I say, overall, for the price point, I don't think you can beat this thing. It does have some limitations. It does have some drawbacks. That's to be expected. And also, don't expect it to be the most universal all-round synth. They can do really nice basses, really nice leads, and everything in between. It has its kind of niche, and I think, to be honest, the thing that it's inspired by, the Prophet vector synth that it was inspired by, the name escapes me, would have experienced similar limitations. And I guess it's worth remembering this is kind of not exactly copied from, but modeled on that synth, so it'll take some of those drawbacks and stuff across from there as well. In terms of the waveforms, as far as I can work out, they're not the original waveforms like on the Prophet synth. This is kind of imitating. I think they're a new set. it would have been cool if there was some way of them getting some more kind of some waveforms from the synth that they're kind of aping onto here, but I guess that's a copyright protection, whatever, copyright law kind of thing. So overall, I think it's a great little synth, especially when you consider the price point that it sells for. It's got a lot of versatility, a lot of features, and to be honest, it delivers a big bang for a small buck, which I just think is great. Yes, obviously it's got some limitations, which we've discussed. Nothing's perfect, and yes, obviously I do think the sound itself is maybe not for everyone, or is also limited to a certain kind of niche. But then again, that's true with most synths, and it's also true of synths that cost 4, 5, 6 times as much money as this. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, guys. It's been a while since I've done one like this with a kind of review and tutorial and all that sort of stuff. So if you've liked it, please let me know, like, subscribe, comment, all that sort of good stuff. And if there's anything you want me to cover in a video, let me know and I'll see if I can do it. But thanks for watching, guys. Bye now.